Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. You've probably heard Democrats across the country totally freaking out about USAID because now suddenly we have Donald Trump's administration looking into it, and it turns out they don't really want to fund some of the things that USAID is funding. And we probably didn't actually know what USAID was funding, because if we did, the majority of us would come out and say, why are our taxpayer dollars going to this? And that question then leads to, why are Democrats so upset about us wanting to defund some of these programs? And so to figure this out, I'm bringing in Tony Kinnett. He is an investigative columnist for the Daily Signal and a radio host at WIBC in Indianapolis. Tony, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Tudor.
Absolutely. So tell us, you've been investigating this whole situation. It's very weird to me that everybody is so up in arms about this and trying to protect it, because I feel like it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. When you pull back the curtain, it's something really weird behind it.
So let's go in reverse. Let's talk about optics. So the Republicans are supposedly, according to the legacy media, which has lost a considerable amount of influence, by which I mean almost all of its influence over the American public. Right now, the optics of the situation really demand from the opposition party to act calm, collected, and just point. If you think really, truly that the Republicans are doing something terrible and evil and awful and crazy, then just like Trump was supposed to do during the Biden administration, you simply point and the American people go, oh, wow, you're right. You are so much better than what's currently going on. But they're not. Instead, they're getting out in front of the country and they're screaming, we're at war, and fight on the streets, and all of this other insane stuff. I mean, actually clipping out their own microphones outside of the Treasury building, screeching in the January.
So wait, let me just stop you for a second, because I think we have that clip. So let's play that so people know. I mean, this is kind of a mashup of a bunch of these people doing this. So here it is, and then we'll get back to it.
To our Republican colleagues, if you do not see the light, we will bring the fire. Resist!
We are going to be in your face. We are going to be on your asses.
We have days to stop the destruction of our democracy. We have work to do.
Tell Elon Musk to take his hands off your money.
We don't pledge allegiance to the creepy 22-year-olds working for Elon Musk. We pledge allegiance to the United States of America.
And goddamn it, shut down the city! We are at war!
We will win! We will win! We won't rest! We won't rest!
There's so much to unpack there.
I mean, besides the cringe that actually stooped my posture, let me just pick that back up again here. I mean, my goodness, the embarrassment. I do want to point out that, and I mentioned that this morning, that they are acting in a way that reeks of guilt, of shame, and desperation. And what do they have to have, such guilt and shame and desperation over? These are simply financial disbursements that have been revealed to the American people. That's it. They're angry about the freezing of the funds, sure, but what they're mostly upset about, as they have consistently shown, is that these funding programs have gone towards the most abysmally un-American things in entirely un-American places. I mean, from spreading atheism in Nepal, literally, quote, expand atheism, end quote, in Nepal, to DEI musicals in Ireland. There are so many of these that the list is growing. My producer right now in real time is actually adding additional things we're finding to the Google document that I'm reading from on things that the USAID program has coughed up money for over the last 10 years. And you go back even further, and it just gets worse as time goes on. So they're embarrassed because it looks like the swamp rhetoric was entirely correct the entire time. This is easily the biggest money laundering scheme in U.S. history, if not in world history.
So you say money laundering. Let's get into that, because I just heard those Democrats freaking out and saying, tell Elon Musk to get his hands off your money. Wait a minute. This isn't going to Elon Musk. This is going to $1.5 million to advance diversity and equity and inclusion in Serbia. I mean, these it's like $70,000 for the DEI musical in Ireland. I mean, $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. Why? And that those seem like, oh, those are not that big of numbers. This is what adds up. This is what we call the pork. Why do we have this? Why aren't we getting this out of our taxpayer dollars? Why are we spending this money? And that's my question to you. Why are they so protective of this? You talked about money laundering. How's that working? What do you mean by that?
So the core issue in this particular case, let's take a look at the BBC and Politico. So BBC has been funded by USAID, the British Broadcasting Corporation. And now BBC has clarified that it only funded part of a BBC charity, which is rather suspicious. I don't know, why isn't BBC giving to its charity and not why is USAID doing so? Why did Politico take $8 million from USAID in 2024? This is an issue. It's an issue because of conflict of interest, first of all, because certain groups have certain political leanings, and there are certain activities and political factionisms that exist within things like diversity, equity, and inclusion plays, or transgender comics in Peru, or transgender operas in Colombia. And whether or not it's $5 to the program or $5 million to the program, it is taking the taxpayers' money and using it towards the political aims of the left, whether it's via culture, whether it's via means of governmental policy, or whether it's via U.S. diplomatic action, which is what USAID is supposed to be used for. And it's when we say money laundering, these are special interest groups that are connected with members of the Democratic Senate, members of the Democratic House, and then members of prior Democratic administrations, as well as in federal agencies who vote, as USAID staffers do, 97% Democrat. Just looking over the list here, it seems that there is a large financial organization, which was unaccountable for ages, that was just donating money left and right, donating your money left and right, only to the left, and doing so in ways that when people tried to say, well, what are you funding? They threatened to sue Joni Ernst from Iowa, the senator, because she had the gall to ask, what is it that you guys are funding?
So why is there no oversight? I mean, because that's pretty standard procedure when you have a group like this that is using taxpayer dollars, that there is oversight. There seems to be no oversight. And just there also seems to be an agenda. And I think that people are misled by what they see on the news when they hear USAID. I think the majority of people think that this is actually aid going to countries. I mean, you hear Bill Gates talking about vaccines. I think people think this is critical food, critical supplies. But you mentioned a transgender opera in Colombia, the transgender comic book in Peru. I mean, we're talking about $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala. Why is there such an LGBTQ aspect of this? And why are we not allowed to investigate it? Why is there no oversight?
Well, so to answer the smaller question at the end there first, why is there so much LGBTQ funding? It's an affirmation thing, because in the real world, with actual real people that aren't watching American culture 24/7, LGB pops up exceptionally rarely. The T pops up zero outside of individuals who are suffering from gender dysphoria. It doesn't happen. So if we're actually going to talk about things that deserve any kind of funding at all, pretending that LGBTQ needs to be felt around the world as a way to make some wine mom in Kansas feel better. So that would be one. Number two, as far as the entirety of USAID funding and why I thought it was funding, countries, and why isn't there accountability for this? Well, to be fair, the USAID does actually give aid in food and health to other areas around the world. It just ended up being $9 million that went directly to Syrian terrorists who slaughtered women and children. So glad to know that we're feeding the bellies of men committing, an actual genocide. Not to mention, I guess we could have fed children, but we did spend $20 million on a Sesame Street show in Iraq. So it's kind of feeding the heart and soul, maybe. It's the reason there's no
bad. It's just shocking. I mean, you can't even make it up when you look at this. And like I said, it seems like small numbers when you break them apart. And is there a reason for that? Is if you spread it all around, all these billions around to a bunch of different organizations, it's harder to follow?
It is. That's part of it. Also, just it flags less. Think about it this way. I'm sure that you file expense reports when you travel. I file expense reports when I travel for the Daily Signal. And when I do, if I spend less than $25 on a meal receipt, I don't have to provide a receipt. I can just say, hey, for this meal, this is where I went. This is how much it costs. If it's under $25, 9 times out of 10, accounting will be like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. No problem. Well, if you were acting uncharitably, you could try squeezing a little bit through that that kindness, right? Because it's annoying to keep a receipt from McDonald's. So, I don't have to send that in. Well, if they keep it in just a couple of million or a couple of thousand, who's going to look over their shoulder when the budget of the United States is so inherently large? And there's no accountability on any of this because Congress is full of apathetic, lazy goobers who are more interested in campaigning than retaining their rights. And a lot of these systems, like USAID, for example, are unaccountable, meaning the president doesn't have to explain why this money was spent before Congress because it was a Cold War organization. It was meant to give the president a diplomatic arm, in addition to his military arm, to stop communism around the globe by bribing countries to work with us instead of Russia. The Cold War ended in 91, guys. I mean, I'm not sure what we're doing, looking around left and right, pretending that, we still need the USAID, and they're not even doing a pro-America mission. I don't know what the United States should have to do with sending Ukrainians to Paris Fashion Week, but here we are.
So you talk about Congress, and Congress has its own slush fund, or it had its own slush fund. This was to pay off people who said congressmen and women had done horrible things to them. And that hasn't come out. That should come out. I imagine that they're not interested in outing other people when they have their own plank in their eye and they don't want people to see the money they're spending. This is, to me, brings us full circle back to Elon Musk, who's like, you know what? Don't pay me. I'm just going to audit the books. No, but why suddenly is everybody so opposed to auditing the books?
I mean, I really love the defense, and I was going to mention this the last time that you said it. I love that Elon Musk is after your money. Tell Elon to keep his hands off your money. He's not being paid. He's not being paid for that. I mean, he's refused payment for this. He is a private commission. By the way, a United States citizen. Everyone talking about this foreigner. Oh, immigrants are bad all of a sudden. Boy, that was quick.
Yeah, that's valid point. Good. Yes, I appreciate that.
Goodness gracious. But not being paid, just again, revealing things that when I have sent FOIA requests before, documents that have been sent back to me redacted with no reason, with no moral cause, with no national security cause, just they're blacked out. Why? Well, because we said so. They're upset about that because there are things that are going to be revealed. I try not to be extremely conspiratorial about what I believe is going on because it's easier to apply ignorance and selfishness before just straight malice. But I am running out of reasons. That's called Rockham's razor, to assume basically the best until you have the absolute worst. There's really little reason at this point not to believe, given what we have seen funded here, that we're not going to find money that eventually goes to Act Blue or through other Democratic fundraising platforms, or possibly to direct business interests tied to Pelosi or Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. I mean, who knows at this point? Could be funding onesies for Bernie Sanders. Who knows?
That to this day, I'm like, the amount of emotion he expressed over a child's onesie. I'm like, good grief. And that is another thing, because those people will sit in a hearing and look at the camera and say, I've never taken money from pharmaceutical companies, which we know is a total lie. And that's why when I see this, I go, okay, what are you hiding? And that's why I wanted to talk about, what do you mean when you say money laundering? Because, well, here we have $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. Is that money going in coming back?
Tourism to Lebanon. I mean, we're really running a travel agency here. This is quite wonderful.
For two countries who have certain visitors are not allowed to go to. So
I can answer the money laundering thing. Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, Marco Rubio is going to have some words to say about that as the Secretary of State. I guarantee it. I hope he gripes at them in Spanish, because it's just more entertaining to listen to. I mean, there's something about being lectured by someone. I went to college and lived in and out of homes that spoke Spanish. To hear a kid lectured from their parent in Spanish is one of the greatest things that one can hear. It's amazing. I hope Secretary Rubio does that. Anyway, to the money laundering issue. Here's why this is money laundering. Here's how this works in the grown-up world. So I do voice acting from time to time. And there was a time in which I worked for a kind of a guild firm, because voice actors aren't important enough to have individual agents unless you're very, very big. And to provide favors for a group that we wanted to pay but didn't want to be seen paying, I would do work for scale by voice acting for them for free, or for a largely reduced rate. So they are still receiving, in essence, let's say $600 worth of services, but I am only receiving $100 for it. Therefore, $500 in value has essentially changed hands without the IRS being any the wiser. And I've worked what's called for scale. This is done in the money laundering governmental agencies like this. If there is an organization that I'm just going to pick a random congressman, let's say Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters really wants this organization funded. She talks to them, and then she gets someone inside, again, this hypothetical situation, from USAID to fund, let's pick one of them here, $1 million for risky research in a certain Wuhan laboratory. They make that donation, and then Maxine Waters might get a gift card from a foreign government or entity donated through Act Blue, which the House is currently investigating right now, and very, very illegal. That's how money laundering works in these systems.
So we were at a meeting the other day here locally, and there were local folks that were saying there's all these foreign actors that are working in our elections, and how do we stop the Democrats from taking money from other countries? And it was kind of interesting because I looked at the person next to me and I'm like, well, we're not allowed to take money from other countries, but we do wonder, how do the Democrats get this massive amount of money? Do you think that is true, that there is money coming into their campaigns from other countries and potentially other governments?
I do, but I also think that it comes from the money not spent idea. Let's say you are planning
in-kind donations.
Yeah, kind of the idea that, I'm planning on, I don't know, I know this next year I'm going to have to, replace the tires on my car. And that is money that I have set aside that I am going to spend there. But some kindly person comes over and says, you know what? I am going to buy the 4 new tires for your car. And now I have this extra money to spend. Oh, what am I going to do with this extra money? If I'm running for office, maybe that money now can be used for my political campaign. This is the issue with the BBC that we mentioned earlier. Why is USAID donating to a BBC charity instead of BBC donating to their charity? What did BBC then use that money they would have spent on their own charity? Where did that money go? This is how a lot of donation issues are a concern. Same with Ukraine. Well, we're giving supplies over to Ukraine. Okay, where did the money that Ukraine would have spent on those supplies and munitions end up going then? Because a set amount changed hands. I want to know what happened with that net sum and where it went and why my taxpayer dollars are what contributed to it. Maybe I'll support it. Maybe I won't. That's the real issue here, is that somewhere there's money that could have gone somewhere and could have come from someone's pocket, but instead it came from my pocket. And at a time when everything's ridiculously expensive and property taxes certainly aren't low, income taxes certainly aren't low, that's a bit of an issue.
Well, you brought up Wuhan, and I think that's key right now because nobody has held China accountable. There's never been any repercussions for China after what happened with the worldwide pandemic that killed millions of people. And yet you start to dig into this USAID situation and you realize that there was money that went toward research at the Wuhan lab, which is where we know the coronavirus came from.
It really is unconscionable to look at the amount of cover-up that has taken place, especially regarding Anthony Fauci and the gain-of-function research that has occurred for years in basically just playing around like a child released into a Lego store with mRNA vaccines. By the way, as a former science teacher and anatomy and physiology teacher, I understand the mechanisms of mRNA procedures and how CRISPR-Cas9 was discovered, which is kind of like genetic scissors. When you start to play with those games, the risk goes up exponentially. China was playing with fire. China knew they were playing with fire, and yet the United States continued to throw money through them and at them just because of the President Obama and George Bushian doctrine of everyone's real good and friendly and loving on the inside. You just got to give enough money to show it, which makes no sense whatsoever. But this has been the United States approach to foreign policy since the middle way point through the Cold War, excluding Reagan. Throw enough money at the rest of the world and maybe everything will be fine. Well, I'm too familiar with the American public education system to tell you that that's a good strategy at all. Throwing more money at something exacerbates a problem. It doesn't make it better.
Yeah, well, I wish you could say that to the folks here in Michigan who continue to throw money at our education system, and yet our kids are in the worst shape they've ever been. I mean, can we look at something outside of just money? And that, I think that is one of the issues that Elon Musk is taking on. Like, that we don't just throw money everywhere. It's not making the world better. It's not making our country better. And we continue to go deeper into debt. One of the big funding buckets, I'd say, out of USAID that we're hearing about is birth control. Condoms, birth control going. We heard about the $50 million of condoms going to Gaza, and all the media went, oh, it's not just condoms. It's all kinds of different birth control. Why are we taking charge of other people's birth control?
Again, it comes down to the social engineering of affirmation. It all comes down to this. The idea is that there is some sad suburban wine mom who has no faith, who has no family, who has no friends, who has nothing of substance and purpose, who was led to believe throughout her teens and 20s that what you needed to do was act like a young adult and act like a kid as long as you can. And that's unfulfilling. And so crashing down from that high of the 20s are over. Now they need a purpose. They need a cause, because humans cannot exist without purpose and without cause. So they need something. So they turn to what they know, because again, they don't have faith, they don't have family, they're not active in their community. And what they find is a lot of political leftism that is wrapped up in hedonism. In other terms, pleasure. What can I get out of life? And that leads down the paths of all of the stuff regarding abortion, because sex has consequences, and the LGBTQ plus 2IA stuff, because sex has consequences. And so then once you are spending all of your time dealing with that stuff, then you need affirmation, because that stuff isn't fulfilling either. And so you need others to affirm you. And that's what all of these social policies are about. It's a way to try to create this narrative that the world is progressively moving towards all of the prophylactics all the time, because everyone's just having casual sex and they're all polyamorous and we're all on a spectrum of gender. And that makes them feel better for the poor decisions that they have made.
I mean, it's so interesting, because as we see this ratchet up in the United States, and we see more and more of these transgender surgeries and more, we had Cynthia Nixon out there saying, my child is trans, my friends' children are trans, my children's friends are trans. And give me a break. There's not that many trans people in the world. There's something else going on. Other countries are not doing this. In fact, in Europe, they were like, actually, this might have been a bad idea. We're not going to do these surgeries. We're not going to have these puberty blockers anymore. This is not healthy. And yet here we are pushing it through this organization with our tax dollars, going into other countries, trying to make this a thing. And it's not a thing. It's only a thing here. I want to switch gears a little bit, because you are from Indiana. I'm from Michigan. One of your people came here. We did not welcome them in. They crossed the border illegally, but they're here now. We now have Pete Buttigieg in Traverse City. And the story is that your South Bend mayor illegally is here. No, he is allowed apparently to run for Senate, but he should not be. So he's here to run. And people feel that way. I got to tell you, people in Michigan are like, wait a minute, you don't just skip the line. And Democrats, it's not, Republicans kind of like the idea of him running because they think that they can beat him. Democrats are really mad. They are big mad over Pete coming here and saying, I've never lived in Michigan, but and he didn't even live in Michigan the last 4 years. He's been in Washington. So he came here, touched the ground, and then went to Washington. And now he's a Michigander and he's running for the Senate. What are your thoughts on Pete Buttigieg running for the Senate here?
First of all, I can't stop laughing. Every time I think about it, it's really quite great. So I have the honor and privilege of having once been name dropped in a speech by Sexton, his husband partner guy. And I've known of the Buttigiegs for a hot minute. They are an embarrassment here in Indiana, of course. And I'll tell you that the most moderate Democrats have no chance of winning in Indiana. But that hasn't stopped Pete since his failed mayoral position in South Bend. So to go up to Michigan, just like right over the border, and instantly claim that he's the hallmark of change, Mr. Secretary of Transportation. Again, very bold to run in Michigan, a transportation-heavy state for Democrats. The UAW hates Pete Buttigieg. I am not sure what he thinks he's doing, but I mean, the arrogance of Pete Buttigieg truly knows no limits. So he's in your hands now.
This is my theory on why people come to Michigan. Michigan sends people all over the country. I mean, you've got Jennifer Granholm, who became the energy secretary. You have Gretchen Whitmer, who's tried to run for president like 4 times now, but nobody actually knows. She's like secretly running. But you do become somewhat famous in a swing state because you're out there all the time. And if you're a Democrat, you're really out there. They like take the swing state governors and senators and they try to march them around the whole country. Why? Because the races are expensive. They bring in a lot of money. They're battling Republicans. And so once they win, they end up with all of this name ID across the entire country. And I believe you're exactly right. He knows he can't win in Indiana. He has no chance of being a senator or a governor in Indiana. So he crossed the border and he was like, okay, now I'm in one of these swing states, not too far from home, and I can get exactly what I want here, which is power. It's not about serving the people. He doesn't care about Michigan. He doesn't care about the people in Michigan. Pete Buttigieg cares about Pete. He wants to be more powerful. He wants to prove that his screw up at the Department of Transportation was just momentary, that he can go in and be a senator for the rest of his life or then run for president again. To me, this is like, it's great for us, like I said, but now you've got the Democrats up in arms. And I think that there's 2 calculations here. Pete Buttigieg, he raised a lot of money when he ran for president. So now the Democrats are in a bit of a pickle. Is a Mallory McMorrow, who went out and spoke at the DNC but kind of came off as a weird, awkward person, going to be able to raise the kind of money that Pete Buttigieg, who is he's very good at talking. He's a slick liar, but he's very good at talking. So is someone who's been a lifelong Michigander, but kind of awkward, a little bit challenging to have events with, is she going to be able to compete with a Pete Buttigieg who's been on the national scene?
You know, I'm not sure at this point if I can see Pete Buttigieg stepping out and making a remarkable performance in the primary, specifically because the Democrats have done this consistently, that they think that, again, the cultural identity of the person just defeats all. And so the fact that Pete Buttigieg comes out and he's like, I'm Pete Buttigieg. Also, I'm gay. And it's like, no one cares. Like, are you good at your job? No. Well, but he's an Ivy Leaguer. That's not exactly a riveting endorsement there. I'm looking at Pete and I'm looking at what accomplishments he's theoretically supposed to have. And is that going to be enough to sway again the union voters in Michigan? It didn't really work in the presidential. I'm not really sure I see the primary voters coming out and going, hey, did you hear about Pete? What a breath of fresh air. I'm kind of, I don't know, thinking there might be some kind of a dark horse candidate that pops up in Michigan to run for the Senate. I mean, former football players seem to be all of the rage in politics these days. Maybe, unlike Ted Cruz's Senate race, you'll have one that, I don't know, skips out of the Lions and runs. That'd be more interesting for me.
No, I mean, it is interesting that it's kind of dying down, the idea that you can broadcast your sexuality, your gender, your race as a reason to be hired. And I say that as someone, you know, I'm a woman who has run for office, but I don't think that the fact that I'm a woman is what qualifies me to run for office.
Hang on. Did you tell them who you sleep with? I'm told that is a winning issue.
That's true. That's true. Maybe if I were just broadcasting that.
I can't believe this took our country 15 years to get over. What a weird regression against civil rights we took for a decade and a half. That is bewildering to me.
Well, that has been my complaint about the fact that really what the Biden administration did, where they marched people out and said that your value is based on your color, it's based on your background, because it actually makes it harder for women. It makes it harder for people of color to come out and run for office, because I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I've gotten, you're just a DEI hire. And I'm like, I come from the steel industry. I know what it's like to walk into a room and have someone look at me and go, you don't belong here. And the last thing I needed was somebody to publish documents saying, these are the people that don't belong, but we're going to put them there anyway, and give people a reason to doubt me, or doubt my friend who is next to me that is a Black American, or doubt my friend who is a gay American. You know, these are, don't judge me by whether or not I am that. Judge me by what I know and how I do the job.
Phenomenal example, Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent is an openly gay man. Do you know how many Americans know that? like next to none. Do you know why? Because when he steps up to the plate, when he was in that Senate confirmation hearing, he was asked repeated, grilling questions that were about his abilities, and he answered masterfully. I think that Besant is one of the undercovered confirmation hearings that took place on the committee floor in the last couple of weeks. It was a masterclass in response. It is a perfect example of meritocracy and one of Trump's best appointments by far. I mean, still, just yesterday, Trump was signing executive orders, and he immediately kicked it over to Scott to explain why Trump had signed that executive order. And Scott just started just right off the cuff listing all of the reasons why a sovereign fund was good for the United States and how it was going to be effective for American citizens. None of that has to do with his sexuality, which means I don't think, oh, Scott got that job because of who he sleeps with. No, Scott got that job because Scott is far better at that job than I could ever hope to be. And that is how it should be. I mean, there's no better standard for that on earth.
I know it used to be that people question whether or not you slept your way to the top. Now it's just you're just watching who you're sleeping with to figure out if you can get to the top. It's bizarre. Who knew that would ever happen? My gosh. I guess it makes it better in a certain way, but I want to promote your podcast because I know it's been such a joy to talk to you today, and I know other people will want to listen to you. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. It's weekdays at 7 p.m. Tell us where we can find it.
You can find that over on YouTube at The Daily Signal. You can find that on X, and then podcasting services, our radio and TV syndication network. And if you find it somewhere else, I won't hold it against you.
That sounds good. Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Tudor, absolute blast. Thank you.
And I thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time. Have a blessed day.